Good morning, everyone. Let me share my screen. So today we will be talking about techniques to secure a workspace and all the tools that are available. So I'm not going to cover the technical infrastructure side of all the work we do in the background to make sure the Skore infrastructure is secure. Here, it's really what you can do as a user of Skore. What are the tools in your toolbox to make the content secure? And what we mean by content secure is making sure only the right people can access the system, your workspace. And once they're in, they can only see the content that they need. So the first big chapter of this little presentation this morning is about what we call authentication. So that means logging into a system. So the security also, there's always a balance between being user-friendly, making it super simple, and being secure. And it's always about finding a sweet spot, right? Because we could have a not secure at all. I just type an email, I click login, and I'm logged in, all right? So without the password, that would be the most convenient way. People don't have to remember a password. People have nothing to do. They just type their email and they click in. Obviously, it doesn't work. So that means you can log in into anyone's accounts. That doesn't work. So we need to have a little barrier, a little workspace. And security, generally speaking, is all about trade-offs. It's all about the simple user experience versus something a bit more secure. And this is what we have to deal with in this world. So authentication. So in order to balance this simplicity, we have in Skore something that we call the single sign-on. You may have heard this term before, is when we ask users to sign in only once into an identity provider. So that can be your Windows or your Microsoft accounts. Some companies are using Google, some companies are using Okta and all sorts of providers. But essentially, you're logging only once, and then all third-party tools such as Skore will just reuse this authentication to use. And for the end user, it's quite convenient. So I will start by demoing it, because to me, this is the one that is on the one hand, the most secure, on the other hand, the most user-friendly. So this is a very good balance. So this is a demonstration on how we do a single sign-on with a Microsoft account. So I'm clicking sign in. Skore recognizes this is a Microsoft thing. That's the first time of the day I'm logging in. So I'm asked for my password, sign in. A lot of people stay sign in, they select yes. I will show you the benefit of doing that later. And now I'm in Skore. All right, so it was quite easy to sign in. Now I will do something I will show you. I will log out again. And because I'm already signed into Microsoft, in my screen, I already signed in. Now the benefit, that's where we really have the benefits of single sign-on, is that I'm already logged in my computer, in my Microsoft or Google domain. So now I'm just typing my email. I click sign in. Then we haven't even seen, because it was done all in the background. It went to Microsoft. Microsoft said, Azure Active Directory said, all right, this user is fine. He's already logged in securely, fine. You can trust him and log in. So this is why we like single sign-on, and this is why in terms of authentication, we think it should be the default route to look for in an organization, especially that a lot of organizations now are moving to Office 365, which comes with something called Azure AD, Azure Active Directory, and integration with Azure AD is dead simple. So this is the most popular single sign-on options that we have in Skore. This is the one that we use the most. We support other providers such as Google or Okta. So single sign-on is great. So sometimes you will have a requirement for what we call a multi-factor authentication. So what is it? A multi-factor is when we think, all right, asking for just a password is not enough. We need to ask a second factor, a second way for the user to make sure that that's the person that is trying to log in. So single sign-on has the benefit that you can implement a company-wide multi-factor authentication for all your people using the Microsoft login or the Google login. You can ask them to have a second factor. Very often this is done with an authenticator app. I will show you. but you may have heard of companies having these sort of like card readers, sometimes where you need to really put your badge in the computer to unlock it. This is already a two-factor authentication, or there are some little systems working with a USB key that you have to put in the USB to unlock some features. So these are all a second factor. Most of them you need a first factor, which is a password, something you know, and you need a second factor, something you have, like a code that will show you, or a key or a card or something. In Skore, you can have, if you're not using single sign-on, you can have two-factor authentication. This is a new feature that we released recently. So I'm logging out properly. Now I will log in into another demo account. So I have, which is called colin@getskore.com. I will sign in. So this is my first factor here. It's asking me for my password. This is what I know. And maybe that's, in most cases, that's enough. But here I have two-factor authentication. So here I'm asking my second factor authentication. And what we do in Skore is, you probably have seen that. I mean, it's more and more popular. But I'm trying to show on the screen. Let's see what's the sweet spot. Yeah, I don't know, with this background. No, it doesn't work, this idea. So I have an app. Let me try to show you actually, because it's quite important. Let's see my beautiful room. So I have an app.
Sorry, we can talk after the Skore session is finished if you want.
Yeah, we have an app that is the generates codes, like 6-digit codes. Every 30 seconds they are refreshed. So I can show it to them. To you, you can take a photo if you want. It doesn't matter, because in 30 seconds this code is not valid anymore. So every 30 seconds it generates a new code, and then I can type in my login screen. So I'm typing it here, the one for Skore. So you've seen I've got a lot of services where I'm using this thing. So the one that is generated for now for me is this one. And now I'm logged in. So these apps, like this Authenticator app, are free. They don't require any sign-on. They don't require any accounts, whatever. There are dozens and dozens on the App Store. I'm using the Google one. The Microsoft one works quite as well. I find the Google one, the Google Authenticator, the most convenient, but maybe that's because that's just the first one I've installed on my computer, on my mobile. So yeah, this is a second factor authentication. So the real feature that we released in Skore recently is the ability to enforce two-factor authentication for all the users of a given workspace. So when we talk about authentication, as a workspace manager, this is something we toggle for you, but you can request us to enable this feature for your workspace so that all the users having access to your workspace needs to have two-factor authentication in place to log in. So this secures access to your workspace. We make sure that people that are getting in are really the people that are getting in, and we can trust them. So this is about authentication. To summarize, recommended approach, single sign-on. That's probably your favorite way as well for the IT departments. Alternatively, Skore has also a secure way to give an additional level of security to accounts, which is the multi-factor authentication I have just shown you. Now, let's say that people are logged in Skore. We can trust who they are. We know who they are. Now we have a couple of ways to secure, and also to make sure that at this stage, it's making sure that people can only see the content that they should see. So first, I'm just rewinding one step. I'm going on the workspace list. First, in Skore, there's nothing that prevents you from having several workspaces. Okay, so why not have if you're working in a consulting company and you have several projects with several customers, probably the first thing to do to make sure that there's no crossover, there's no risk of mixing content between one customer and another. And also, when I talk about simplicity versus the user experience and security overhead, having several workspaces for different customers when we know they shouldn't see each other, that's probably the simplest, because you can just trust once you have a process, you know it's only available for a given workspace. So yeah, if you're working on several projects that have not much in common, or they need to be quite well segregated, creating several workspaces is probably the best. For each workspace in the admin, we will have a list of users. So you will see all the users of a given workspace. This is where it can be maintained. We see the last access. So this could be a screen where we do some sort of cleanup sometimes. We see someone hasn't logged in for a couple of years. We can remove their accounts as well, to be sure. We are working on some tools to make this kind of cleanup tasks a little bit more easier. So I know my users that are in my workspace. Now I want to secure access to a given process. So processes, they each have access rights. So if I'm clicking on the process menu here, I have manage access rights. And by default, processes in Skore are quite open. Everyone in a workspace can see them, and all the editors of a workspace can edit them. Okay, that's quite open. Sometimes there may be reasons why you want to hide the process to the view of different people. So here, if I'm restricting, there was already a restricted access rights in the past, so that's why it comes up. So here, what I'm saying with these restricted access rights, here is managed by individual. I will show you can do by user groups, which is a million times more convenient. Only myself and Craig can see it, and only me can make changes to it. So this is managing access rights by users individually. This very quickly becomes quite annoying. So what you can do instead, I will just reset that for now. What you can do instead is in the admin group, admin space, create user groups. And for example, we have a human resource group, no users in it. IT, we can have Postmus Office group, project management team group. So you can create user groups, and then on your process, you only have to assign a user group, and then you manage the members of a group. So this makes the management of process access rights easier. My recommended, a good scenario where you need to hide processes is when a process is work in progress, when a process is not ready to be published yet. You can maintain the access rights of processes. That's fine, but keep in mind that it creates quite a bit of overhead. And when I'm talking with customers and we talk about access rights, the question I'm always asking is the process really confidential, or is it the content of the process, like associated documents, associated templates and project designs and product design or decision-making logs or meeting minutes, or is it the associated documents that are confidential, but actually the process, if everyone knows the process, it's fine. And very often we come to the conclusion that actually, if people can read the process, it's okay. But what is very confidential, where we need to make sure that only the relevant, assigned, known people have access, is very often only the documents attached to a process. So this is where, when you're associating documents with a process, our recommendation is to use what your company already has as a document platform. So very likely Microsoft SharePoint, probably, or maybe Dropbox, Google Drive. There's loads and loads, but the one we see the most often is Microsoft SharePoint. So our recommendation is processes very often are okay to be public, because describing how we work as a company is very rarely a super confidential thing. But we understand that we don't want everyone to see, again, say meeting minutes, design documents, financial reports of all sorts. So all these things, our recommendation is to store it in SharePoint. Why do we recommend doing that? Is first, a company is probably already used to SharePoint. They're probably using SharePoint already for a lot of projects, so people don't have to learn about a new way to store documents. So they are just don't have to train them. And the corollary, if you train people on storing the documents for a process in SharePoint, they can use the skill of using SharePoint for anything else. SharePoint is a very powerful tool. It's very often badly used, but it's a tool that I learned to like over time, because it's very powerful when it's used properly. And what I realized in my consulting assignments, when a company has SharePoint, it's always worth taking half an hour to explain to people how it works. how revision management works if you're using it, how the access rights are cascading if you're using them. There's a little bit of concepts to understand in SharePoint that once someone leverage them, uses them properly, they can benefit from it, not only for their process mapping work and process documentation, but they can use it all over the place in all the organization. So I always find a good skill to train people on. So to summarize, when it comes to accessing content, you first is to create several workspaces. If you have different projects with different customers, if you're a consulting company, that's probably the most obvious. Second, you can manage access rights at a process level, but you need to challenge really yourself. Is the content of this process really confidential, or I'm just creating myself additional work to maintain the access rights? Because yeah, it's a couple of clicks, but that means you need to do it on every single process. So think about the overhead you're creating yourself. And the good way is like, is the content of my process really that confidential, or is it the associated documents? If you're coming to the conclusion that the only thing confidential is the associated documents, our recommendation, use SharePoint, Google Drive, whatever your company is already using, and manage the access rights there. There are document management platforms that are made for that. Your IT department may also already have some routines to check access rights, and if the right people have access to the right thing, then they have user groups set up and managed by HR. So there may be all sorts of practices and processes in your organization that you can leverage. So yeah, so these are the tools to secure content in, or make sure that only the right people can access Skore, and once they are in, they can only see the content they should. And I'm more than happy to take questions now and discuss single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, access rights, SharePoint, documents access.